We are a fledgling organisation, but I think what we're going to go through is to describe some of the sort of DNA that we've picked up as we've gone along through what I'll describe was quite a it was quite a journey over what's now been almost 3 years of having a look at Sayes Court. I am first and foremost, I guess, a resident of Deptford, South East London, SE8, and I first came there when I started off at Goldsmiths College, and I think one of the first sort of things we were taught at Goldsmiths was to go, well, look, if you want to find out about what's going on, then the first thing you really need to do is go out into New Cross and go out into Deptford, because it's there where you're really going to find, you know, what this city really is all about, and then inform some of the ways you did. So we did, and I went out and I fell in love pretty hard with the place, and as you do when you're 18, it's something that kind of stays with you. And I think the first thing to say about Deptford is that it's incredibly diverse. And I know you can obviously say that about London, any area of London, but although diverse, has an incredible sense of identity and an incredible sense of place, which I know is a phrase also well used, but it does exist. So this is the other side of that coin. This is the coming up Convoy's Wharf development, which kind of encapsulates all of the typical challenges facing our growing cities in the 21st century. It's high density, it's a mixed use, a luxury scheme, very low levels of affordable and social housing. It's 3.5 units over 40 acres, and it neighbours one of the most deprived wards in the country. Health inequalities, lack of opportunity, overstretched infrastructure, deficiency in open space. It's all there, and it poses the question, and it posed the question to us, was, well, can new development help to alleviate those problems and deliver a positive long-term benefits to the whole community? And it really is a game of good old-fashioned planning game. The site, as I say, 40 acres, Convoy's Wharf is a little thing here. Yeah, it's, on first looking at it, looks like any other brownfield site in need of much urgent development and regeneration. Unfortunately, it's not entirely the case. Convoy's Wharf was the site of the Royal Naval Dockyard at Deptford, founded in 1513 by Henry VIII, and also which was the foremost dockyard in the realm, but was also the site of John Evelyn's home and garden. John Evelyn, 17th century horticulturalist and diarist. Underneath that concrete screed is a number of different landscapes. This is actually a slipway, which you can see is this one here. And our initial sort of reactions to this archaeology was, well, how do you use them to inform a future sense of place upon the site? John Evelyn was a diarist, contemporary of Pepys, but having had to travel Europe during the English Civil War, visited many of the most famous gardens in Europe, travelling to the Low Countries, Italy and France. When he returned to Deptford in 1653, he laid out one of the foremost gardens of the age. He took European ideas as a parterre there, a grove, and a little botanicals garden. And just to give you an idea, this line here is the boundary wall to the dockyard. And so he married into this property. It was a difficult site, perhaps, but in doing so, developed the idea at Deptford of gardens as a tool of thought, essentially. He had all of the things you would imagine a 17th century gardener to have, automata, water fountains, and was deeply concerned with landscape in the city, insofar that he began to write a number of pamphlets on the subject, one of which was Silver, or a Discourse of Forest Trees, which advocated the planting of timber across the country as a sustainable resource. And the Royal Society, which he co-founded, is very keen to stress that idea of Evelyn as this sort of founder of the sustainability movement. 200 years later, of course, the garden had fallen into disrepair after Evelyn's death, And it was when his descendant, William John Evelyn, came to think about what to do with the piece of land, he thought about dedicating it in perpetuity to people of Deptford. This hadn't been done before in London, apart from Leicester Square, and there was a problem in terms of the existing manor house and the piece of land being gifted at the same time, and there was no legal body that existed. So he went forward and engaged with the open spaces movement of the time. This is Octavia Hill, and they came across an idea of laying out the garden again, but in the most modern and innovative kind of way that they could at the time. But also to think along the terms of, well, okay, well, perhaps there could be a company, perhaps, that could buy this piece of land, could gain revenue and be able to maintain it. Octavia Hill didn't quite like the idea of a company and thought, well, actually, perhaps maybe a trust would be a better name. And the documentation, it was a very nice day in the archives, is that the letters pertaining to Sayes Court, on the top of them is written the idea National Trust. And we therefore get to a point with Sayes Court where we have it stacking up very nicely, the origins of the sustainability movement, but also that 19th century, early 20th century idea of public amenity and the idea of the rights conferred onto us on open space. Unfortunately, Sayes Court and the formation of the National Trust didn't quite happen in time. And during the First World War, this park was requisitioned into the dockyard for the First World War, and unfortunately was never given back. And this is kind of where we end up today with the encroaching development of Convoy's Wharf. Now, as I say, many people in Deptford were concerned about the development and thought, well, actually, and this development had been going for about 5 or 6 years at the time that we got involved. It was a new reiteration of the master plan. And we thought, well, how about we could engage with the ideas of YIMBY, or YIMBYism, i.e. yes in our backyard, yes in my backyard, that we were going to engage with the developer and say, look, as a community, we've got some very great ideas about what we would like to do at Convoy's Wharf. And this group of, as I say, Deptford is diverse. There were architects, there were landscape architects, but there were social workers. This lady here runs a clothes recycling business and was interested in using Deptford as a port. We then began, and I think this maybe just to tie this back in, the history of Convoy's Wharf, and I think going into what the planning system is and what it was doing for us, it was very much of sort of exclusion. And I think when you're having to deal with a planning application which is about that thick, there's only a certain number of people that can go through that and understand it and then try and condense it down into a way in which we can all understand. And the developers were certainly outgunning us on that, seeing as they had all the consultants and they could pay for them. So, being architects, one of the first things we thought to do was, well, how about we model it? And this was our attempt to model essentially what 3,500 units actually looks like. We just took the existing high-rise that we had. Now, I don't want to get too stuck down on density, but it was certainly an interesting way of, because when we did it like that, we ended up with more open space. But, and then this was another case in point, so you get to consultation processes, which this is I won't mention the architects just yet, but this is a model of the Convoy's Wharf scheme, and it had been capped at 2 stories all the way across. And I think someone at the time, I can't remember who it was, described it as immoral. There is something very difficult about presenting that to the public. And as you can see, one of the more radical members came in and thought to sort of show what was really up. Our ideas for Sayes Court, and with my partner Rue Angel, who's a landscape architect, and in the amazing history at Sayes Court, we thought, well, there was a number of things that you could do. You could advocate the restoration of the garden. We could recreate the 17th century garden at Sayes Court. We have a very good plan. This model here I actually found in a church in Deptford, dusty and in the crypt. We got it out. But what we really felt was the most appropriate interpretation of the history was to have the most innovative garden that we could get once more. And what we began to do was to lobby the developer, lobby the planners, and say, look, one thing is very clear. We have the archaeology of the manor house, which I showed on a previous slide, and we have the existing park, what was left of the park, which we're standing in now. What we would ideally want to do is to connect that manor house archaeology up with the existing park. In doing so, and to make ourselves feel slightly better as we went along and did it, we decided that, well, the garden already exists. It's under concrete, but it's there, it's got buddleia, it's actually got quite an interesting, diverse sort of range of flora, sort of, just hinting at something that's underneath. And we began to run a number of workshops in Sayes Court, and this is 2 local primary schools who came in and began to learn a little bit about John Evelyn, but also we put up some scaffolding and showed them over the fence, and just to sort of re-engage their imaginations with the local park, which to them was neglected, underused, and somewhat forgotten. The process snowballed, and we were invited then to come in and speak to the developers and to the master planners at the time, and we began to strike up a relationship with the planners as well, who were very interested in perhaps some of the potential of Sayes Court. As we went further along, we began to reach out obviously to National Trust. They seemed like an obvious people with their origins there, but also Eden, World Monuments Fund, Council of British Archaeology, London Parks and Gardens Trust, and we began to create a kind of a grand alliance of opinion about Sayes Court as a important, not only heritage asset, but the potential it could have in terms of the development to come. This is the site as it is now. As you can see, our existing park is here, and the river is here. The context, I think, is important. We're, I think, very happy that this little park and our area that we're concentrating on isn't right bang in the middle of the site, but actually straddles the site, allowing it to face in 2 directions, really. That is to the existing Deptford context, but also to what can we do as an organisation so early on in the development of Convoy's Wharf to play out certain policies, to push those policies such as green infrastructure, SUDs, for example, all over Convoy's Wharf, and to, in a way which is reflective of the process we went through, to augment the planners. The planners, under-resourced, often need to be able to know which bodies to reach out to, which are there and willing to help, and we'd be able to do that, be able to go, well, actually, maybe you should talk to the Landscape Institute, maybe you should talk to the National Trust, and to allow the planners to get a robust framework ready, so that when the detailed design comes in for Convoy's Wharf, we're in a much stronger position. As the planners put the boot in, it got called in by Boris. Boris signed it off pretty quickly, but in doing so, made Sayes Court a key provision to that planning application. And so we started on a process of design, and this is very, very sort of loosely based out, but we started working with David Conn Architects and Dan Pearson Studio to look at the way that we could bring in the larger civil society organisations to come and help our grassroots movement in the process of effecting essentially political change. And I think we're very clear that that's what it has to take, really. It has to take from the top and from the bottom to be able to drive it forward. And that's raising public awareness, which translates into political gain. These are just the designs we came up with. Any architect, if you work with them, they can't help themselves but redesign the master plan. And David and Dan Pearson, interesting ideas about how we argue for that extra space. I think when you look at it, yes, we have reached out and grabbed that piece of archaeology, and the developer has been has dedicated that land to us. It's now with us on a peppercorn lease, and also a 18,000 square metres of building, which is where we're going to put in the new programme for Sayes Court. And we're now reaching out further and working with the University of Greenwich, who are helping us to, again, just develop those ideas about how local communities can be empowered to take a real effect on their built environment and not to be passive to it. I think, to be able to understand that sense of entitlement. You have the right of entitlement to change your built environment. It's a bit of a slog, but I think in the path that we've trod, perhaps we can learn lessons from it. And next time, in doing this, we got a good result. Next time, we can get an even better result.